Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Germination Retail Roundtable webinar. My name is Mark Zinkowitz, and I serve as editor for Germination, and I'm happy to be your host today. Today's theme is a SWOT analysis of Midge Tolerant Wheat. We'll talk with 5 experts who will discuss 5 distinct aspects of Midge Tolerant Wheat: marketing, testing, contracts, breeding, and entomology. Before we begin, I would like to thank our sponsors, 2020 Seed Labs and SeCan, for their support. Now, during the presentations, you'll likely have some questions for our speakers. Please type these into the chat box at any time during the webinar, and we'll address them during the Q&A session that we'll hold at the very end of our webinar today. Also, today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available at our website, germination.ca, following the event. Also, we will be live tweeting on Twitter. Feel free to follow the hashtag #SeedRetail as we go along. Now, I'd like to reiterate that today's webinar is what I'm calling a SWOT analysis. You may have heard this term before, and it's a great thing to have for something like Midge Tolerant Wheat, which last year actually celebrated 10 years of stewardship success. We'll be going into 12 years soon. Time sure flies, especially during a pandemic. So it's great to be able to celebrate this milestone in Midge Tolerant Wheat. Now, SWOT is spelled SWOT and stands for strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This is a planning technique that is used to help people and organizations identify strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats related to business competition or project planning. Our goal today is to identify some of these and talk about what those of us in the industry should know in order to ensure that we protect this valuable technology. If you're not already familiar with what Midge Tolerant Wheat is, we did a webinar on this topic a few years ago that you can really delve into. It explains how the technology works and exactly why it works, and you can view that at this link here. So feel free to write that down, and that will take you to our website, and you can view the webinar that we did a few years back. Now, our first speaker today is Todd Hyra, who is Western Business Manager for SeCan. Now, before we talk with Todd, there's Todd. How are you today, sir?
Doing great, thanks.
Great, thank you for joining us. Before we chat with you, Todd, I'm just going to play a short video here that celebrates 10 years of Midge Tolerant Wheat stewardship success. So we will watch that, and then we will have a chat.
So I'd like to say thanks to producers and the industry as a whole for their efforts in making Midge Tolerant Wheat a success. After 10 years, we still have the technologies working. We have a growing number of varieties across a range of classes, and the high level of compliance. So it's a big shout out to producers for making this a huge success.
The early 2000s, we had a lot of issues. 2003, 2004, there were a lot of midge around it, and of course we didn't have the varieties at that time, and we lost a lot of yields. Sometimes we were able to spray, which definitely helped, but this midge varieties give us another tool, basically, in the whole wheat perspective to operate. And all the varieties which came out the last few years are not only better when it comes to midge resistance, but they're also better in other cases or in other things, maturity and yield and so on, and disease in general.
At an economic threshold, Midge Tolerant Wheat can save producers $36 an acre, and over the 27 million acres that have been grown over the history of the technology, that adds up to close to $1 billion in savings. So it's real money that saves producers and allows wheat to stay in rotation.
I think since the Midge Tolerant Wheat has come along, that has added value to our operation and to our customers' operations. I see the value. It's just one less thing that you have to worry about. We still check for midge, and if they're at a certain rate, you still may have to spray in certain situations, but overall it's taken maybe one less operation away, and especially in the midsummer when people have other things they want to do, like go to the lake, or you don't have to spend hours and hours every night out there chasing midge.
The Midge Tolerant Wheat Stewardship Program is working. So the interspersed refuge system was introduced when the wheat midge resistance gene was introduced, and it was supposed to keep populations of wheat midge from becoming virulent or overcoming that resistance to the gene. And 10 years have passed and no populations have been declared as virulent.
Yeah, it's been a huge success to date, and all we ask is that producers continue to honor the responsibility and ensure that the stewardship rules are followed, so that we can have this resource for generations to come.
Wow, I got a little misty-eyed watching that video. There was a trade show happening in the background. That's a little bit of a shock to the system. I really miss those days, eh? Hopefully we'll be back to that very soon, Todd.
I'm missing the haircuts.
Yeah, people like me who don't have any hair, we're fortunate that way. We don't have to worry about that, but I definitely sympathize. So, no, thanks again for joining us, Todd. And today, talking about our SWOT analysis, I wanted to identify with you a great opportunity for Midge Tolerant Wheat, and that's the fact that more people than ever are growing Midge Tolerant Wheat. Can you talk a little bit about that and why this technology is gaining this kind of traction?
Yeah, I think the simple answer is the varieties are just that good. If you look historically, back when we launched the first Midge Tolerant varieties, wheat growers had to give up something to get Midge Tolerance. The varieties were a little taller, so they had straw management or straw strength issues to manage. Some of the first varieties, though, didn't have the best fusarium ratings. And so now with this latest generation of Midge Tolerant wheat, we have short, strong straw. We have fusarium tolerance. It's as good as anything else in the industry. And the yields have always been really good on Midge Tolerant wheat. So you combine all of that, and then you overlay the fact that these varieties also have built-in insect protection, it becomes a very easy decision to say, well, why wouldn't you do that? You overlay this with the forecasts that we're seeing in Saskatchewan and Alberta and what we extrapolated to for Manitoba. So the populations of midge are there in the soil and just needing the right conditions. And back in the springtime, we did actually have those rainfalls around May long weekend across much of the prairies that gave that 25 mils that would trigger the emergence of midge in a much bigger way. So you've got all of these pieces coming together, and so those that grew Midge Tolerant wheat in 2021 in that big way should be pretty happy about that. They've taken some stress away, and hopefully have that will have protection on more of their acres than ever before. When you think about that economic threshold, back in that video I mentioned the $36 per acre. That was based on a very conservative $6 wheat and 40 bushel wheat. And so if you fast forward that to where we are today and look at yields of 70 or 80 bushels per acre, or looking at a wheat at $8 or $9 a bushel, you're close to $100 in potential savings by growing that if you're at that economic threshold. So there's lots of things that are feeding into this, the value of the crop and the strength of the agronomics. And you overlay that all with the, I guess, quality of life. And when it comes to, I just think of my own brother on our family farm who's been living in his sprayer pretty much for the last 2 or 3 weeks. He sprayed for weeds. He's now spraying for flea beetles on some escapes, and he'll have fungicide spraying. And if he can take away one spraying operation from one of his crops and provide an extra day to do something you really want to do rather than kill bugs with insecticide, it's a huge peace of mind and adds to your quality of life. So Midge Tolerant Wheat is a fantastic crop that really does add a lot of value to Western Canadian farmers.
Now, part of our SWOT analysis is to also look at potential threats, and it's a great thing that more people than ever are using Midge Tolerant Wheat, but we have to add a caution. As more people use it and grow it, they need to be aware that observing the Midge Tolerant Wheat Stewardship Agreement is vital. Can you add a little bit of emphasis to that before I let you go, just to caution people that obviously it's great that more people are growing this, but we have to protect the technology?
Absolutely. So when we launched the products 12 years ago, coming up on 12 years ago, we added the stewardship requirement, which requires producers to sign an agreement saying that they'll only farm safe seed 1 generation past certified. That ensures that the refuge that is built in, the onboard refuge of 10% of a susceptible variety, remains in balance. And so we know based on experience that when midge are at high levels can take out 50% of the refuge quite quickly. And so we want to make sure that that stays there. And by ensuring that those generations are limited, that ensures that the refuge stays in balance and that this technology is going to be around for future generations. Models show that it could be around for up to 90 years. So we're 12 years in, heading into 12 years, and we still have not identified a breakdown, and we want to keep it that way. There's other tools that are coming, but we don't know whether there'll be agronomic baggage that goes along with those. And so right now we've got really good varieties. We're performing really well for Western Canadian farmers, and we don't want to lose that.
Yeah, and if anything, COVID has been a good lesson that if we all band together, we can definitely do good things. So thank you very much, Todd, for your time today, sir.
You bet. We'll talk later.
Now, our next speaker today is Holly Hamilton. She's a molecular lab technician at 2020 Seed Labs. I spoke to her the other day. We pre-recorded our talk, and she explained some recent changes to refuge testing protocols for Midge Tolerant Wheat, which present an opportunity for breeders and labs to work together. So we will hear from Holly now. Our talk was a few minutes long, about 3 minutes or so. So we will now hear from Holly. Thanks so much, Holly, for joining us on our webinar today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Now we're doing a little bit of a SWOT analysis today: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So talking about threats and opportunities, I understand there's been some changes with regards to seed testing when it comes to Midge Tolerant Wheat, refuge testing. Can you explain a little bit about that and how it might present some opportunities for seed labs and seed testing?
So the biggest change that affects seed testing in seed testing labs right now is that CSGA has given the responsibility for validating testing for Midge Tolerant Wheat over to the breeders. So this means that it's up to the breeders and seed labs to work together to develop a working test that growers can use to test their varietal blends. So this is a good opportunity for, we'll be able to see more competition, newer technologies are coming out, and it's giving breeders a chance to have control over their seed.
So can you talk a little bit about refuge testing and what tests are available in that regard and how they work?
Yeah, so there are lots of different methods and strategies that can be used for testing, and it's really up to the lab and the breeder to kind of figure out how to do that. But overall, what each lab is doing is we're testing the amount of each variety present in the sample. So we're not really looking for resistance, and we're not looking for like insects. We're just looking to see what percentage of the sample is made up of Midge tolerant variety and what percentage of the sample is made up of the refuge variety. So at 2020 C Labs, we actually have markers for several blends, and we're continuously developing and validating tests for new blends. So the best way to find out what tests you need, and if we have that, is to contact us directly.
So Holly, before I let you go, what would you say is the #1 question you get from people in regards to refuge testing?
Yeah, so a lot of times people want to know why we're doing this, or why we need, why they need to get this test done. And it's really important, not only for growers, but for the industry as a whole. We want to maintain that refuge system and preserve midge tolerance, right? We're trying to protect breeders, and we're trying to protect that SM1 gene. So what we're trying to do is to keep that refuge system at the proper level in order to prevent the buildup of resistant midge.
Thank you so much, Holly, for your insights today.
Thank you for having me.
Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you so much, Holly. Holly is available in the chat box. So if you have any questions with regards to seed testing and Midge Tolerant Wheat, feel free to engage with her through the chat. Now, next, we're going to talk with Lorne Hadley of Seeds Canada before we get to our 2 keynote speakers today. Lorne Hadley is Director of IP Protection for Seeds Canada. Now, if Midge Tolerant Wheat technology isn't protected, we could see resistance develop quite quickly. Now, obviously, that poses a threat to the technology, but one big strength is the new Midge Tolerant Wheat Assurance website. Lorne explained to me how this site works and why it's such a benefit. So we're going to hear from Lorne now. His presentation is about 10 minutes. He takes us through the website, what it is, how it works, and why it is so valuable.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I'm really pleased to be here to talk about a success story. One of the strengths of this program is it was developed by the industry, the Wheat Midge Stewardship team, who have kept a close eye on the success of this particular technology, did express some concerns about the paper system that was being used for contracting. So the distributors, along with myself in a previous organization, got together and we put together, with the help of AgCall, what we're the Midge Tolerant Assurance Site, which I'm going to talk about today. So the Midge Tolerant Assurance Site is essentially the one place that distributors and retailers and producers go to confirm their compliance with the contract terms. Now, what it's about is essentially using a one-stop shop for online for the management of the program. So this was developed, as I said, with our association with AgCall, and we used the very, very common, we used the same branding as we've used all the time, and we went through and developed a system. For those that haven't been on it, this is what the system is. It is an acronym that describes this web-based tool. And what this tool does for distributors and retailers and farmers is actually confirm that, number one, a farmer knows what Midge Tolerant stewardship agreements are, and then in very efficient ways make sure that a farmer, a retailer, is able to make sure that they've recorded that the farmer knows and that there's compliance. So this system is put up and operated, the system itself is operated by AgCall, and the Seeds Canada staff now provide oversight into the operations and coaching on the system. What it's based on are these very simple and supportable points. It's evergreen, it's paperless, high level of security and personal protection. With the assistance of retailers, we keep the grower information up to date. With the assistance of distributors, we keep the retailer information up to date. It allows the retailers and seed growers, retailers, and distributors to ensure that all of the seed that's sold has actually got an agreement on it, which includes a portion of transferring responsibility on wholesale sales. We've used a system of training that's integrated with the Midge Tolerant Stewardship team. So we have a system in place where, as a retailer, you go and get some training online on what Midge Tolerant means. And then you also go on and get training in a separate routine on how to work the Midge Tolerant system. So this system was set up and deployed in 2017. And since then, we've signed up over 6,000 producers, and over 500 retails. And it's there to make it easy. It's there to make it appropriate for all of those to work within the system to confirm they're meeting with the requirements. Again, these things are something that we've used. The tool is there to support the technology. I'm sure you're going to have lots of people more expert than I that talk about the fact that Midge Tolerance about preserving this very valuable technology, and the value it seems to be increasing. This allows for us to have all of the necessary information protected and summarized so that not only do producers know farmers know what they've signed up for, that as we go through and do audits that are done to confirm that we have all the information in one place. So the distributors and retailers can be audited, and so can producers. And we work in terms of management to make sure that the information is current. And that's a job. New people come in, people retire or move on to other businesses. We do our best to make sure we only have the information that's necessary in the system. Just very briefly, this is the sign-in page that everyone sees. This is how you get in. Once you get in, it's an intuitive system where it's pretty easy to see what you need to do and from the various places. And it provides reporting. So a producer can go in and see what's going on. A retailer can go in and see, what he's entered, and from that understand where he's got other things to do. And also we make sure that as much as possible that there's only one contract per producer, so that there is, that there's only one contact point for a producer. So that means that retailers, although they come from different areas, assign the contract to the appropriate producer. So again, pretty straightforward, worked very well in the last number of years we've been using it. There are always things that need to be looked at, and we meet with the Wheat Midge distributor team to talk about improvements. And every year we talk with the stewardship team, usually in association with the PGDC. We talk about how well it's working and what we're hearing and what feedback we get from producers. So it's the core information. This is the core information collected electronically that allows us to manage the system and also allows us to get some feedback from producers about how it's working. So that, in a nutshell, what it's all about. The opportunity that exists from this particular evergreen single point of entry, Mark, is that we've shown that this can be done. We've shown that producers, given the proper information, will use an electronic system. We've shown that retailers, given the proper coaching and support, will also use this to help them manage their businesses. And the distributors see a benefit in this. They have live results on how things are going, how many contracts are signed for which variety. Of course, the distributors only get the information for their varieties. They don't get to see information from anybody else's. And the same goes for retailers, and the same goes for producers. So that's what it's about. There's some of the information on this slide about where it is and how you get to it. We also have put up just the Midge Tolerant information site because they are closely linked and closely aligned, work together very closely with the Midge Tolerant team to ensure that we're using the same words to describe the same thing.
Well, thank you so much, Lorne. What are some of the most common questions you get in regards to this site?
I think probably the biggest question we get is around making sure that people are able to operate it well. I think that that's where we get questions about how do I do this? Where do I get this information? That's most of what we hear. I think that's one of the questions. A lot of concern that we don't share information inappropriately. So as I said, distributors only see information about their varieties, retailers only see information about their specific sales, and farmers, of course, only see those things about their specific purchases. So those would be the big questions. There are times at which there are kind of operational questions, Mark, but generally those are handled through the toll-free line that's available from Ag Call to answer those questions if somebody forgets a password or if there's an error that needs to be corrected. As with everything, these database management systems always require some updating, always require some grooming, if you will. And we meet with the stewardship team and the distributor team, and we'll put those in place as they're requested. Trying very hard to make this a very efficient system and not overbuild it. We only put those things in that are being used. So it's very focused on who bought what variety. That's what it's about.
And are there any potential, I guess you could say, weaknesses to the site? Anything that needs improving coming down the pipe as a way of making it better, more secure, anything like that?
I think like all stewardship programs, we've heard concerns that there's starting to be a number of requirements, and sort of everybody's kind of done their own thing. So we have a Wheat Midge stewardship site. There are other sites that are stewardship for other types of things that may be in other crops. We're talking about, as you know, we're talking about value creation and certainly about the variety use agreement site. So the big question that we get from people is, can these all be one? And the answer is, theoretically, these sites can be under what we would regard as a single platform, but there's quite a bit of work to do to get there. We would like to get to the point where a producer has, for the seed industry, a single point of entry, if you will, for data that the seed industry needs to maintain about a producer. And ultimately, that's what it's about. I mean, this is about compliance and stewardship. We're collecting information from the producer so we can come along when necessary and confirm that they're complying. So that's the big question is, do we have to keep building sites, or can we kind of build one and add on? And again, as Seeds Canada and seed industry, we're certainly talking about that a lot right now.
Well, thank you, Lorne, so much for your time today. Very informative presentation. And if anybody has any other questions, feel free to email Lorne. Now we've provided his contact info as well. So thanks a lot, Lorne, and have yourself a great day.
Well, thank you very much.
Bye for now, sir.
Yep.
Yes, thank you, Lorne. And I believe Lorne is also available in the chat as well. If you have any questions regarding the assurance site, feel free to interact with Lorne. Now, before we wrap up for the day, we're going to talk with our two keynote speakers. The first today is Santosh Kumar, who is a wheat breeder at AAFC Brandon. Santosh is going to talk about the world of Midge Tolerant Wheat breeding, which covers all aspects of our SWOT analysis today. After all, what is plant breeding if not identifying strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and trying to create the best possible varieties with what we have to work with? So thank you, Santosh, for your time today, and welcome, sir.
Thanks, Mark. And at this point, I will be uploading a presentation.
I will load that up for you right now. There you go.
Perfect.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, everyone, for joining in. I hope you can hear me all right. Today, I'll be presenting about the wheat breeding that we do at Brandon, and particularly what do we do around the orange blossom wheat midge tolerance in wheat. Next slide, please.
You have, actually, there's a little button. You should see it right at the bottom, Santosh. It says next.
Great.
So, yeah,
yes.
You've got total control.
Thank you.
Yep.
So most of the cereal breeding pipelines do look similar, and in wheat breeding, it's no different. We start with the two parents that we cross or hybridize together and develop populations that goes through multiple generations of selections before becoming a variety. So as you can see here in the top, we take two parents, P1 and P2, cross them to make F1 progeny or offsprings. Either we take it into a self-pollination pipeline here that goes up to 7 generations, or in wheat, we have the advantage of using double haploids, where you take the F1s, you essentially make homozygous plants very quickly and start treating them in F7. So rather than going through the 7 generations, you just use the double haploids and get to that homozygosity, which is similar to F7s, in about 2 years rather than 4. That saves a little bit of time. And this all encompasses in the early generation breeding selection. From there, advanced generation testings are done to assess the performance of the lines over a vast geographical area. And we look at lines that are higher yielding and have good resistance to diseases, as well as have the quality that we are looking for. From there, a few lines get into the registration trials, and we do it from F11 to F13 generation. So a registration trial for wheat goes on for 3 years under the PGDC guidelines. And when the lines do pass the required criteria, they are then registered as lines, or if a company is interested in pursuing that line as a variety, we register those lines. So that's just a brief outline of what breeding is. We look at 3 major objectives. One is agronomic objective, where we look at the yield-protein relationship. We want higher yield, but not at the cost of protein. So we keep that negative relationship moving towards a positive side, where we can have higher protein in a better yielding variety. We try not to push the maturity too hard because, the longer a line stays in the field, the better the yield would be. But then you don't want to get into inclement weather where we have to harvest under very difficult conditions. So we keep the maturity tight. For height, semi-dwarf varieties are preferred, and lodging is definitely not something that anybody wants to deal with. From the disease side of things, we look at the 3 rusts: stem rust, leaf rust, and stripe rust. We look at FHB very aggressively at Brandon, where we have the FHB nursery for testing all AAFC lines. We look at bunt And in insects, our mandate is to look at wheat midge, and that will be the focus of our talk today. Under quality objectives, we look at the milling yield of the grains, we look at the dough properties, and finally the baking quality of the flour. Just to make a note that we want all of these traits in one variety, and that is what plant breeding is all about, bringing all of that under one package so that the farmers have the best of the best. So from the same pipeline that we use for breeding, how do we breed for orange wheat blossom midge, or the short form wheat midge? We start with selection of parents, and we usually the parents that we use are coming out of a breeding pipeline, and we know a lot about those parents. We have tested them with markers, we have done some phenotypic testing, and we know if the parents have the resistance to wheat midge. And today we'll be primarily talking about the SM1 based resistance and not the overposition deterrence that some lines do have. But primarily SM1, we can test it with markers, and the effect that we see on the line when the gene is present under field condition is very stark. So the difference is quite a bit compared to a non-resistant line. So we look at the two parents. If both the parents have SM1, we know the entire progeny will be Midge tolerant. And then life is easier. We can breed through that without a lot of testing, because we know whatever we produce out of these two parents will have SM1 and will have resistance to wheat midge. If a selection of parent is done where we want to bring in good traits from a variety that does not has SM1 into a variety that has SM1, then we are segregating that trait throughout the population and then testing for the presence of SM1, and the resistance to wheat midge is becoming more and more challenging through the progeny. So I will primarily talk about what do we do when we have crosses where SM1 gene is present in one parent and absent in another one. In these cases, we look, if the double haploids are made, we have removed the problem, which means all the lines do become SM1 positive. Even though parents were positive and negative, in double haploids, we have kind of brought that resistance and SM1 together very quickly. But in under a self-pollination condition, this progeny will get tested multiple times throughout the generations. And I have kind of pointed out with the wheat midge as to when we do the testing. When we don't know if the SM1 is present, the parents are tested. Some of that information is available through the registration trial pipeline. As we progress through the selfing of the populations, we start testing again at F10 generation, which is a B test if you are familiar with the terminology. In this case, the phenotypic testing is quite labor intensive, which means you have to go through every head of every plot that you grow and see if there is resistance under midge pressure. If the midge pressure is absent, you essentially cannot do an effective selection. And I will get to this genotypic testing a little bit better. But essentially under genotypic testing, you go directly to the genetic constitution of the variety or the line or the plots, and you test them with markers to see if the SM1 is present. Moving forward, we try to test all 3 generations of the registration trial to make sure that lines are getting propagated from one generation to another, 1 year to another, and they are pure. There is no mixing, there is no error in seed, and we make sure that if there is SM1 present, it gets tested every 3 years. And we do both kinds of testing. And some of it will be presented by Tyler today, where he will be talking about testing registration trial lines. Under phenotypic testing, this is how a wheat midge testing is done and how it looks like if you look at the seeds. So on the top here, in the middle middle Petri plate, you see grains that are not damaged by midge. So this is a resistant variety. On the left side here, this is a variety that has some damage, but still it's a decent yield because a lot of the kernels that are badly damaged gets blown out when you harvest it, and the combine takes care of that. On the right-hand side here in the Petri plate, this is the yield that cannot be used because it's too far gone for damage, and the grade is really poor for this wheat, so it really doesn't go anywhere, and that's a total loss. Under very heavy midge infestation, this is the loss that we see. For testing, individual heads are picked, and each of the seed, each of the kernel is extracted from the heads to see the damage. It's done under a stereo microscope, and as I said, it's quite labor intensive. It takes a lot of time for people to sit down and look through the microscope and dissect every head and look at kernels till they find the one that is damaged, or go through the entire head and not see any damage, in which case it shows resistance. These are just some examples, images from the microscope, just to show you some damage and how it looks like when you are actually dissecting the head. Coming to genotypic testing, we rely on updated information, and a very good piece of information that was recently published last year in paper Nature, where the information around the SM1 gene was made available. The first image over here at the top shows you how the gene looks like in an SM1 resistant line. So this full gene is present. If you look at the SM1 non-carrier or a susceptible line, only half the gene or less than half of the gene is present. And that's why you don't have the resistance. We use this information to design primers, which are present over here and here, and do a testing through the polymerase chain reaction, or the PCR, to see if we can distinguish the lines that are resistant or susceptible. In your left side panel here, using the same set of primers, you can see all the lines that have SM1 gene and are tested phenotypically also show the presence of this gene based on the primers we used. Whereas the lines that are not resistant to SM1 do not show that band. So it was where we have used the very updated information, the newest information possible, to see if we can use our laboratory-based methods to figure out genotype of the line. And I believe this can be used in the marker-assisted selection of SM1 tolerant lines under the wheat breeding programs. These are some of the new cultivars. I have removed a lot of the cultivars that either get declassified, deregistered, are put into a different class of wheat from where they were originally based on the new CWRS wheat classification. And this is not an exhaustive list. This does not contain all the lines, but I've tried to bring in the most important ones, or the most sought after or asked for lines. And you can see that the CWRS class has the largest number of lines because a lot of the breeding efforts is under this category or this class of wheat. So we have, AAFC Cameron and Toddhira from back in 2014-15, which came out of our program. Leroy is another line that came out of our program and is available. AAC Russell, Starbuck, and Wheatland are very popular lines from the Swift Current program. AAC Warman came out of our program. And these are some CDC Landmark came out of CDC Saskatoon. And there are a bunch of new lines that are coming up. AAC Hot is something to look forward to. AAC Broadacres is something to look forward to. CDC Succession, which is a Clearfield Plus line. And there are 2 lines that were supported recently under the PGDC meetings. And I'm not sure if they are all taken up by the companies. In CPSR class, we have the HY 2095 that came up recently. There is AAC Castle that is available. Under Durham, there is Weyburn and a new line TT1010 that came up. So this is by no means encompassing all the lines that are Midge tolerant, but this is a good start where people can see what is available under different classes. A little bit on what after SM1. Where are we going after SM1? We know there is only 1 gene available. There is no plan B as of now. We have to protect this gene. But as scientists, we always keep looking for new sources of resistance. We keep, we try to identify genetics from, not just from Canada, but all over the world that may provide an alternate source of Midge resistance or Midge tolerance. Even if it's not as strong as SM1, we want to look at those and incorporate it into our program. So there is research ongoing where we look at very diverse set of germplasm and hope to find something that, that may help SM1 survive longer, if not replace it. This is the work, a lot of work done by the team at Brandon, and the wheat and the oat program work together. So this is a combined crew of the wheat and oat program at Brandon, and an extremely dedicated piece of, people who take pride in what they do. And with that, I thank all the funding partners, some of who are in the audience today, and I really appreciate their funding and their support for wheat breeding.
Yes, funding partners are indeed very important. So thank you so much, Santosh, for your presentation today. That was great, sir. Thank you so much. If you have a question for Santosh, please type it into the chat box at any time. Before we take questions, we will move on to our last but not least, our final speaker of the day, Tyler Wist. So thanks again, Santosh, and we will chat again in a moment. Welcome, Tyler.
Hey, thank you very much, Mark, for having me on the show today.
Well, thank you for your time, sir. Now, for those who are not already familiar with Tyler, Tyler is a field crop entomologist at AAFC Saskatoon. He's going to talk about insect threats today, but also some future opportunities in the area of potential new resistance traits. So, Tyler, I will turn the floor over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mark and Santosh. That was a great introduction to SM1. I quite enjoyed looking at the gene up on the screen there with the tag. So, excellent work from your breeding program. And thank you for the introduction and a bit of a shout out too. So, I'm actually not going to talk about the seed testing that our lab does, just because Santosh basically covered it there with his slides. So I'm going to talk to you about the life cycle of the wheat midge, about when you want to look around for controlling it, and also some of the projects that we have on the go that are trying to find maybe an alternative to SM1 or at least a supplement to SM1. So if you need to get a hold of me, there's my email address and my Twitter handle there. And I've titled this The Future of Wheat Midge Control with a question mark, because we're still in the testing phase for a lot of these. So here's the orange wheat blossom midge, and most people in the industry have just shortened it down to the midge. I still call it wheat midge, just because it helps to nail down what that critter really is. And the orange term comes in because the flies are orange. Here's some larvae. The larvae are also orange, and there's another fly there. This one's a female. You can see she's got her ovipositor sitting right there. And the wheat midge has been termed the most serious insect pest of spring wheat in Western Canada by Ian Weiss and Marge Smith. And they were some of the early researchers working on the wheat midge problem. They worked out of the Winnipeg Research Center. And Ian's still involved with us. So you saw those hands there tearing apart the wheat. Ian's one of the ones who's still doing that for us. So we'd like to keep him around as long as we possibly can. So that's what the adult fly looks like, but it's not the adult that does the damage. It's these larvae here in the center that do the damage to the wheat kernels. And so this is what normal wheat kernels look like on the top. And then these are those shriveled kernels that Santosh talked about, blowing out the back of your combine. So this represents total loss, total yield loss. And if you look really closely, you can actually see a couple of orange third instar larvae still hanging out on those damaged kernels. So when we're looking at seeds, often we just see the damaged kernels because these larvae have dropped off the heads. But if we're lucky enough, we still get some larvae and we get some larval cast skins that we can look at to determine whether those heads are resistant or susceptible. And there's the close-up shot. This is the second instar. So this would be, the wheat midge goes through 3 instars, and so this is the middle instar. And when I say instar, when you're an insect and you wear your skeleton on the outside of your body, you have to shed that skeleton to get bigger. And they do that 3 times. So here's the basic life cycle of the wheat midge. And I got this slide courtesy of Owen Olfert, who did a lot of the early research on wheat midge as well. So they spend the winter in an overwintering cocoon, and it's actually a third instar larva that cocoons this way. So they can stay dormant in the soil until conditions are right. Some of the research has shown up to 13 years in the soil. When I say conditions that are right, we need about 25 millimeters of rain through May to kickstart these overwintering cocoons to start developing into third instar larvae again. So they'll shed their cocoons and they move up close to the surface as a third instar larva, and then they pupate. And so if you remember anything from your biology class, this is the resting form of something that has complete metamorphosis. So we go through this pupal phase, and then out come the adult moths. And this happens around the long weekend in July. It's usually when their peak hits. But it does depend on those early rains. So the same rains that get your spring wheat up and out of the ground also gets these wheat midge up and out of the ground. And they're really well synchronized with the heading stage. And so we're looking right when the boot splits. That's when the danger zone is. And so we were looking from that till about mid-anthesis. And then after flowering is mostly complete, the changes inside the seed make the seed really unpalatable for the larvae, and they don't really survive unless they're on there early. So that moisture in August, those August thunderstorms cause the third instar larvae to drop to the ground, and then they overwinter again to come out next year, or the year after, or the year after, or the year after, depending on if conditions are right. Fortunately, there's just this one generation a year, but we can have staggered emergence of adults. So they might not all come out at once. They might come out over a longer period of time. And that is what we've been seeing in the last little while. And so we use wheat midge pheromone traps. And the pheromone was actually determined by a Canadian lab out at Simon Fraser University. And so what this pheromone lure does, and you can see the lure right here in the trap, is it pretends to smell like a female wheat midge. And so it brings in the male wheat midge that emerge a little bit earlier than the females. So on the trap there, we can see a bunch of dead orange wheat midge males. So here's a trap at my Saskatoon farm. On the left is a later planted wheat and an earlier planted wheat on the right, just so I can try to give the wheat midge the best home possible in what I call my wheat midge nursery. And here's what we had to do in 2019 on the right. We had to water those wheat midge because we didn't get any moisture in May. So at the end of May, we hit it with 29 millimeters, and we can actually see that spike on, we can't see it here because I don't have my 2019 map up. This is what a emergence of the wheat midge looks like on a weekly basis. So here's that last week in June, and they've already started to come out a little bit there. And then we have our July long weekend when you want to be at the lake, out come the wheat midge. Now these 2 sites here, Preston and Campus, these are Pierre Huckel's wheat breeding sites for the CDC. and they're irrigated. So they always have a very good chance of having a lot of wheat midge. And so we can see that we've got peaks at different locations, but an extended period of emergence until about the end of July, when they just drop right off and we don't see adults coming out anymore. Now, the Midge Tolerant Wheat came about with some egg Canada breeders back in the 1990s, when wheat midge was a really big problem and they were losing thousands of hectares to wheat midge and spraying thousands of hectares with insecticide to try to control it. They found in winter wheat this SM1 gene, and what happened on those winter wheats was that the wheat midge just died at the first instar level. So the eggs hatched, and then the wheat midge larvae started feeding, and then they all just died. And so they crossed this into spring wheat, and our first VB, or midge tolerant wheat, was Unity, released to the market in 2007, or registered in 2007 and hit the market in 2010. So that 10 years of midge tolerant wheat, we're actually in year 11 this year, going into our growing season 11. So there's about 35 midge tolerant varieties, and Santosh has covered those off, but they hit all the wheat classes. And let's go back to what Todd said earlier on in this presentation, where this $36 an acre savings is actually a really conservative estimate. And when Todd redid the math, we were looking at about $96 an acre savings just from having midge tolerant wheat in your field under wheat midge pressure. So the mode of action of that SM1 gene, when those first instar larvae, and I've got one circled here, you see how small they are compared to the second instar? And this second instar did not want to sit still when I was taking a picture. And so it's actually a bit longer than that. Then the third instar is kind of weird. It hangs out inside the skin of the second instar, and it just sits around and waits for those rains to come before it drops to the ground. But the SM1 acts on the first instar larvae. So some damage happens with the initial feeding, but the plant quickly reacts to this larval feeding and increases the levels of these two acids. I think ferulic acid is the main acid that the larvae don't really like the taste of, and so they stop feeding and just starve to death. So they're very small, but sometimes we can find dead first instar larvae on the SM1 tolerant wheat. So what we're trying to do for the future of wheat midge control is to protect that SM1 gene. So we've already got the midge tolerant wheat agreements in place with the refuge 90-10 mix of midge tolerant wheat to a very similar wheat that doesn't have the midge tolerance. And so that 90-10 mix is there to keep the population from becoming completely resistant to SM1. So if we do have a midge that pops up that has gone through its whole life cycle on an SM1 wheat, and it breeds with one that hasn't because it's being produced in the refuge, it breeds out that overcoming of the SM1 gene. So what we're trying to add in are a couple of other things. So we have another gene that we're calling egg antibiosis, and I'll talk about that at the end. But in terms of a pyramid of defense, egg antibiosis would be the last line of defense before SM1. And the first line of defense is overposition deterrence, which is out there already, but seems to have a more complicated genetic background than SM1. And we're looking at a couple of mechanical resistance traits like hairs on the glooms and awns. So most wheat already has awns, but we're evaluating it as a way to knock down wheat midge. So overposition deterrence was first determined back in the 2000s. Bob Lamb at AAFC, they found that some of these lines just got less eggs laid on them by the wheat midge. And so I've represented that here with OD. So when you've got a choice of an overposition deterrent wheat and a non-overposition deterrent wheat, you get a lot more eggs laid on the non-overposition deterrent wheat. When you just give it no choice, you still don't get a lot of eggs on that overposition deterrent wheat. And so the varieties that had this, or we have Reader, Partial, Wascata, some durum wheats with the parent line Cala, and then this one called Key 10. And so we have a project under the Canadian Agricultural Partnership led by Alejandro Costamagna, and most of the work is being done by his postdoc Chaminda, and we're trying to figure out the mechanism of overposition deterrence. So we've got about a 50% reduction in egg laying, so that's at the top of the pyramid. You just get less eggs to have to deal with on your wheat plant. So the wheat midge resistance trait then of overposition deterrence, when you introduce it in an olfactometer, and that's just what it sounds, it's a smell meter, you take that smell of the overposition deterrent wheat and you introduce it into a chamber with susceptible wheat, you actually can reduce the egg laying on the susceptible wheat. So that says this is a volatile cue. There's a smell happening. And so some papers from Burkitt showed that there's kind of a 6-component blend of smells that wheat midge is attracted to, and you can actually break it down to just 3 compounds and still have wheat midge flying towards your lure. And so Chaminda found that this compound here, Z3-hexanyl acetate, is lower on the overposition deterrent wheat. And if you change that ratio of this blend enough, you lose the attractiveness of the wheat to the wheat midge female. So another one we're looking at are these hairy glooms, and so this is just getting in the way of female wheat midge landing and making that choice to lay an egg. So we're working with Rob Graff, who developed Smart Wheat, and spent a lot of time probably coming up with this acronym, which is Cytodiplosis mosolana, which is the scientific name of the wheat midge, alternative resistance in triticum. So I'll use that little infographic there as just a funny aside. So you can see the hairy glooms there. And then Pierre Huckel said, you know what, I've got a hairy gloom trait as well. And when we classified it, we classify these as 0, which means no hairs, 1, which is kind of where CDC teal is falling, and then 2, which is really well exemplified in Smart 171 that Rob Graff developed, and it's over here on the right. So in initial bioassays with this, here's our susceptible roblin, and teal hairy versus the CDC teal non-hairy took a lot less eggs than the non-hairy version did. So this is telling us that they maybe don't like laying eggs on things that have hairs that poke them when they're trying to land and make overposition choices. So out in the field, we grew this in 2020, and here are the ond and the hairy traits right here, and both of them are yielding higher, even though they both have, one has SM1 and one doesn't have SM1. So this is really interesting. It's kind of telling us that maybe ons plus the hairy glooms actually gives a yield bump, even without the presence of SM1. So when we look at those smart yields, these are those agronomic traits that Santosh was talking about. Some of them have ons, some have hairy glooms, and then SM1 plus or not. And here's our yield according to the Brandon check. So some of the smart lines are yielding really well. And so we've got all the agronomic traits that we're looking at as well here. So there's 171. This was the hairiest double haploid, and it didn't have ons, but Rob Graff is really interested in this one, and he's already using it in his breeding program. So thank you to Rob Graff for coming up with these. And for the pictures. Now, it's not a perfect system, so just having those hairy glooms and ons alone is reducing the eggs a bit, but not a whole lot, because we're still getting larvae on those heads. And so anything that says non-SM1 here, we are still getting larvae happening, so that SM1 is still needing to kick in to kill those at the end. At the bottom of the pyramid, let's say. And our egg antibiosis trait, it was found in a winter wheat variety as well, and it actually took more egg laying than the susceptible roblin, but what happened was everything died. None of the eggs seemed to hatch on this winter wheat line. And so Kurt McCartney has crossed that into spring wheat. He crossed it with roblin and another one. So it wasn't a reduced overposition, but it actually seemed to be acting faster than SM1 to kill the wheat midge. And so in our experience in the field now, it seems to really synergize with SM1. So more work is coming on that EA gene, and I'd like to acknowledge all of our sponsors. and say thank you very much, because I know some of you are listening here.
Thank you so much, Tyler.
You're
That
welcome.
was great. We have a few minutes yet before we sign off. So if you have a question, please type it into the chat box. Now, I'd like to have a quick little roundtable chat with you guys, if possible. And Santosh, you were talking about how there's this new information out there in regards to what the SM1 gene actually looks like. And so you obviously have a lot of information at your disposal that you didn't have in past years. I mean, you're learning new things about the gene and how it works. Santosh, what for you is like the ultimate Midge Tolerant Wheat? Like if you had a crystal ball and you could look into the future and say, you know, this would be my dream variety of Midge Tolerant Wheat, and this is what it would do and how it would work. What would that variety be for you, Santosh?
Wow, you saved that one for me.
No pressure.
Yeah, that was a good one.
So, you know, if we had alternate sources of resistance and we wouldn't have to worry too much about protecting SM1, would be my ideal scenario. As Todd mentioned earlier, is that, you know, we have come a long way from having a Midge tolerant line at the expense of other traits that we want. But now we are at a stage where we have very good resistance to fusarium, which is a major challenge. We have all the rusts covered. We are, you know, hitting the target for CWRS bang on, and the yields are improving along with the protein. So we are at a very good stage where the lines that are coming out are really, really good. Are they ultimate? No, there is always scope for improvement. That's what keeps us employed. But I feel we are at a very, very good stage. However, finding that other source of resistance that can protect SM1 for long, you know, for a little bit longer, would be my ideal hunt.
How about you, Tyler? Like the work you do with regards to insects is fascinating, and I'm sure, I mean, people love insects or hate insects, I should say, but what's sort of the most common question you get about this topic? And yeah, for you, Tyler, what would that ultimate variety look like?
Let's talk about the ultimate variety first. So when I first envisioned the ultimate variety, it of course had SM1. It has that egg antibiosis gene in there, and it kills the eggs before they even have a chance to hatch, so that there's no damage being taken. It also has oviposition deterrence, so that we get less attraction to the plant, and it has hairy glooms and awns to really get in the way of those wheat midge flying in. In terms of the stalk, I'd like to see it with at least a semi-solid stem in case we have issues with wheat stem sawfly. And there are a few literature hits on aphid resistance as well. And so maybe we could breed aphid resistance in. And so we'll cover off the top 3 pests of wheat all in one shot. And then of course we need our disease package and some excellent yield as well. And standability, because I don't want to try picking my wheat up off the ground with the combine, because I'm not that great of a combine driver. What was the next part of the question? The first part. All right, Mark, I can't hear you, so maybe you're muted. I'd like to hear from Todd too.
Oh, we're waiting for Mark to come on. It's pretty. You went for the fence on that one, Tyler.
Oh, yeah.
Stacking on. I was just going to go for solid stem, not the aphid resistance. So, yeah, Santosh will be breeding for a while if he's going to put all those into one package. But that's
well, I'm just getting
the other
started.
piece of this is The other piece of this is is keeping ahead of what is already there. And so we've got evolving rust races and evolving diseases that are changing as well. And so keeping all of those in check as you're adding these other traits is the ultimate goal. So trying to put it all into one package is the breeder's challenge. And so we've come a long way in the first 10, 12 years, and keeping ahead of all of these pests will be the continued challenge, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, guys. It seems like Mark is having a little bit of problems with his audio, so I am here to step in and save the day. I think we managed to get through all of our Q&A questions, though, so we're just going to go ahead and wrap up our webinar today. So we wanted to thank everyone again for joining us, and especially thank you to all of our speakers for joining us. And we want to give a big shout out to Germination's sponsors, 2020 Seed Labs and SeCan, for making this webinar possible. Now, if you missed any part of the webinar, make sure to tune in to the recording that will be up on Germination within the next couple of days. But until then, we hope you all have a wonderful day, and hopefully you found this information of value. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Welcome. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Take care, everybody.